Welcome back to Void of Fears, where the line between nightmares and reality blurs with every story. Our community grows stronger with each brave soul who joins us. We're 8,000 deep now, creeping toward our goal of 10,000 subscribers by year's end. If you dare to continue this journey with us, hit that subscribe button now. Leave your mark with a like. Share your own encounters in the comments below. Now, let's begin today's story. I still remember the morning it happened. April 17th, a Thursday that started like any other. The sun rose at 6:18 a.m., streaming through my blinds and across my face. I remember checking my phone, force of habit, and scrolling through notifications before my feet even hit the floor. Nothing unusual, nothing that hinted at what was coming. My name is Dr. Eleanor Reeves. I'm a neurologist specializing in consciousness studies at Meridian Memorial Hospital. For the past decade, I've dedicated my career to understanding what happens in the brain during altered states of consciousness. Comas, near-death experiences, deep meditative states. The irony doesn't escape me now. That morning, I followed my usual routine. Shower, breakfast, toast with avocado, and 2 eggs over medium, and a quick scan of the news. The headlines were predictably grim. Another environmental summit with no binding agreements. Food shortages in regions facing unprecedented drought. Coastal cities implementing new flood barriers against rising seas. Normal for our times. I dressed in my typical work attire. Charcoal slacks, a blue blouse, comfortable shoes that could handle hospital corridors. My apartment was small but efficient, located just 15 minutes from the hospital. Through the window I could see the city waking up. Traffic building on the main thoroughfare. People hurrying along sidewalks. A construction crane swinging into motion on the high-rise going up 2 blocks over. The drive to work was typical. Traffic on the parkway stopping for coffee at the corner shop where Mika, the barista, already had my order ready. "The usual, Dr. Reeves," she said with a smile, sliding the cup across the counter. "Added an extra shot today. You look like you need it." She was right. I hadn't been sleeping well. For weeks I'd been plagued by dreams of darkness and disconnection, floating in a void where my thoughts were the only real things. I'd wake gasping, certain I'd been somewhere else, somewhere important, but the feeling would fade within seconds, leaving me with nothing but unease, and the faint impression of a message I couldn't quite recall. "Thanks, Mika. That obvious, huh?" I attempted a smile, dropping my change in the tip jar. "Dark circles don't lie, Doc. Whatever you're working on must be intense." If only it had been work keeping me up. "Just one of those phases, I guess. See you tomorrow." The radio played softly as I navigated the remaining distance to the hospital. A discussion about the latest climate migration statistics from the southern hemisphere. Millions displaced, seeking refuge in regions that themselves were becoming less habitable. The commentators debated policy responses with the detached tones of people discussing abstract concepts rather than human suffering. I switched it off as I pulled into the hospital parking garage. Some mornings, I couldn't bear the weight of problems so vast they seemed unsolvable. Better to focus on my small corner of science, where occasionally we made incremental progress. I arrived at the hospital just before 8 a.m. My first appointment wasn't until 9:30, so I headed to the lab where we monitored our long-term coma patients. We had 5 at the time, all participating in our consciousness mapping study. The lab was quiet that morning, just Dr. Patel analysing overnight data and 2 technicians monitoring equipment. Dr. Amit Patel had been my colleague for 8 years. Brilliant, methodical, with a dry sense of humour that emerged only after you knew him well. We collaborated on numerous papers exploring the neural correlates of consciousness. His specialty was the technical side, designing protocols that could detect the faintest signals of awareness in apparently non-responsive patients. "Morning, Eleanor," Patel said without looking up from his screen. "Patient 4 showed some interesting delta wave patterns around 3 a.m. Might want to take a look." I nodded, setting my coffee down and pulling up the data on my tablet. Patient 4 was Miguel Alvarez, 32 years old, in a persistent vegetative state, following a car accident 14 months prior. The brain activity was unusual, not concerning but definitely worth noting. Increased delta wave activity during what should have been REM sleep, followed by brief gamma bursts that typically indicated higher cognitive processing. "This is interesting," I murmured, expanding the graphical display. "Almost looks like his brain was trying to wake up." "That's what I thought," Patel agreed, finally looking up. No external stimuli recorded. Room temperature, lighting, and sound levels all constant. But look at the autonomic response data. I swiped to the next screen. Heart rate, blood pressure, skin conductance, all showed slight elevations coinciding with the unusual brain activity. "Worth investigating further," I said, making annotations. "Let's run a comparative analysis with his previous..." The lights flickered, once, twice. The monitoring equipment emitted a high-pitched whine. "Power surge?" I asked, glancing at Patel. He frowned, checking his own screens. "Systems are showing normal power levels, might be..." He never finished the sentence. The air in the room seemed to thicken, pressure building against my eardrums. My vision blurred, not darkening yet but losing focus as if the world were suddenly underwater. My tablet slipped from suddenly numb fingers. I tried to speak but couldn't form words. My vision tunneled, darkness creeping in from the edges. In those final moments of consciousness, I was aware of the others in the room experiencing the same phenomenon. Patel's mouth open in a silent gasp. One technician, Laurel I think, clutching at her throat as if she couldn't breathe. The other, David, already collapsing against the monitoring station. The last thing I remember was falling. Not just physically, though I'm sure my body crumpled to the floor, but falling away from myself, like something essential was being pulled from my body, stretching and snapping like an elastic band pushed beyond its limit. Then darkness. Complete. Absolute. I was dead. I know that now. Clinically, biologically dead. For exactly 3 minutes and 14 seconds. But I was still aware. Not conscious in the way neuroscience defines it, something else. Something we don't have proper terminology for yet. The void wasn't empty. That's the first thing you should understand. It wasn't the absence of everything. It was something else entirely. A space between spaces. I couldn't see, not with eyes anyway, but I perceived. I sensed the presence of others around me, countless others, all disconnected from their physical forms just as I was. Imagine being everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Imagine existing without form, but with complete awareness. Imagine perceiving without senses. The closest analogy might be dreaming, but even that falls short. In dreams, our brains construct scenarios, images, sensations based on neural activity. This was different. This was pure consciousness, unfiltered by physical limitations. We were confused, afraid. I felt the panic of millions washing over me like waves. Time behaved strangely there. What felt like hours might have been seconds. What seemed momentary could have stretched for days. I tried to make sense of my surroundings, to understand what had happened. Had there been some catastrophic event? A nuclear strike? Was this death? The afterlife? But rationality seemed inadequate in this space. Logic belonged to the physical world, to brains processing information through electrochemical signals. Here, understanding came differently. I became aware of others near me, not physically near, but somehow adjacent in this dimensionless space. Recognizable patterns of consciousness. Dr. Patel was there, his organized analytical thought patterns distinctive even without words. And beyond him, Countless others stretched in all directions, a vast network of disembodied awareness. Then came the first contact. It wasn't like communication as we understand it. No words, no language, just knowing. Information and emotion transferred directly from one consciousness to another. I sensed rather than heard. You are not alone. You have been selected. You are needed. The presence that conveyed this wasn't human. I'm certain of that. It felt ancient and vast, like trying to comprehend an ocean when you've only ever known droplets. Yet it also felt familiar, as if it shared some fundamental quality with us. Images flooded my awareness. Earth from space, beautiful and blue, then changing. Coastlines redrawing as ice melts and seas rise. Forests burning, cities abandoned. Dust storms sweeping across once fertile farmland. I saw humanity struggling, diminishing, retreating to shrinking, habitable zones. The visions became more specific. Water wars in regions once known for abundance. Massive migration events triggering conflict and collapse of social systems. Disease spreading through overcrowded refugee centres. Agricultural failure due to pollinator extinction and unpredictable weather patterns. Then worse scenarios unfolded. Conflicts over remaining resources, desperation, collapse. The last remnants of human civilization hunkered in Arctic regions, the only places still capable of supporting agriculture. Less than 1 million humans remaining, clinging to existence in a world they had destroyed. But these weren't prophecies. They were possibilities, probable outcomes based on our current trajectory. Through this immersive experience, I understood with perfect clarity. We were approaching a convergence point, a nexus of crises from which recovery would be impossible once crossed. The intelligence showing me these visions conveyed the concept, cascading system failure, each crisis triggering others in an accelerating spiral. The presence, the intelligence, conveyed understanding. Half of Earth's population has been temporarily removed from physical existence. You are the selected half. You will return with purpose. I wasn't special, I realized. I was simply part of the half that had been chosen. The selection appeared random across all demographics and geographies. The intelligence explained that this was the only way to reach enough of humanity simultaneously. Why only half? The answer came with crystal clarity. Balance. The world needed continuity as well as change. Those who remained would maintain essential systems while we integrated what we were being given. Together, both halves would navigate the transition. Then came the implantation. The sensation was unlike anything I can adequately describe, like having knowledge woven directly into the fabric of your consciousness. Not information you can immediately access, but something deeper, something that would emerge when needed. It wasn't just data, it was understanding, perspective, ways of seeing problems that transcended our current thinking, solutions that emerged from entirely different paradigms, technologies that worked with natural systems rather than against them. I felt my individual awareness begin to merge with others around me. Brief connections formed, impressions of lives and personalities. A farmer in Kenya who suddenly understood how to transform his arid land using techniques no one had taught him. A teacher in Brazil who glimpsed education methods that could accelerate learning tenfold. A child in Vietnam receiving intuitive knowledge of mycelial networks and their potential for environmental restoration. An engineer in Norway suddenly grasping principles that would revolutionize energy storage, each receiving different fragments of the whole. No single person would carry the entire solution. The intelligence made this clear. Cooperation would be essential. The solutions required a network. Just as the intelligence itself was a network, we were being prepared, made into carriers of something precious, vessels for solutions. As this understanding settled into my consciousness, I began to perceive something else about the intelligence. It wasn't alien. It was familiar in the most profound way possible. It was us, humanity, but evolved, transformed by necessity and choice over thousands of years. The realization staggered me. We were communicating with our own distant descendants. They had found a way to reach back, to intervene at this critical juncture, to help us avoid the catastrophes they had inherited. Then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. The pull reversed. I felt myself rushing back, crashing into my physical form with jarring force. I gasped, lungs burning, as they filled with air again. My heart thundered in my chest. The hospital floor was cold against my cheek. Around me, others were stirring. Dr. Patel coughing violently, one technician sobbing, the other still motionless. The monitors were screaming alarms. On the screens, our coma patients showed simultaneous spikes in brain activity, then flatlines, then, miraculously, normal patterns returning. My watch said 8:17 a.m. 3 minutes had passed since the power fluctuation. I struggled to my feet, limbs uncooperative, as if I'd forgotten how to use them. The room tilted and swayed around me. Everything looked too sharp, too bright, colors more intense than they should be. My senses felt overwhelmed after the formless void. "Amit," I croaked, reaching for Patel, who was now sitting up, blinking rapidly. "Are you—" "What was that?" he interrupted, his voice hoarse. Were you somewhere else?" I finished for him. He nodded, eyes wide with something between terror and wonder. Before we could say more, the emergency system activated. Alarms blared throughout the hospital. Code Blue announcements came in rapid succession from multiple floors. The hospital erupted into chaos. Half the staff and patients had collapsed simultaneously. Now they were reviving, disoriented and terrified. The other half never lost consciousness but witnessed their colleagues and patients suddenly drop dead before inexplicably returning to life minutes later. We stumbled into the hallway. Medical staff ran in all directions. Patients who could walk were emerging from rooms, confused and frightened. Others called out from beds. The intercom system crackled with overlapping emergency codes. Dr. Lin, the chief of neurology, spotted us and rushed over. She hadn't been affected. She was from the half that remained conscious. "Eleanor, Amit, thank God you're all right. What happened to you?" Everyone just collapsed at once. No pulse, no respiration. We started emergency protocols, and then everyone started reviving simultaneously. "It wasn't just here?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Lynn shook her head, her expression grave. "It's everywhere. The entire hospital. And reports are coming in from across the city, across the country. It appears to be global." My phone started vibrating in my pocket, dozens of notifications flooding in as communications networks came back online. News alerts, text messages, social media updates, all reporting the same phenomenon. Reports flooded in quickly. The phenomenon was global. Approximately 3.9 billion people, half the world's population, had died simultaneously for exactly 3 minutes and 14 seconds. Then they returned. The world changed that day. How could it not? In the immediate aftermath, my medical training took over. Despite my own disorientation and the overwhelming experience I'd just had, there were patients who needed attention. Many of the returned, as we were already being called, experienced physical symptoms: dizziness, nausea, sensory hypersensitivity. Some had seizures. Others reported vivid hallucinations. But most, like me, were physically fine despite the impossible experience of temporary death. Our vital signs normalized quickly. Basic neurological functions remained intact. The hospital lab was inundated with blood samples, brain scans, and other diagnostic tests, all showing nothing conclusively abnormal. By evening, the initial medical crisis had stabilized. I found myself in the hospital cafeteria, slumped in a chair, staring at untouched food while the television mounted on the wall cycled through news reports from around the world. The same scene played out everywhere. Half the population collapsed, half remained conscious to witness it. 3 minutes later, the collapsed half revived. The pattern held across every continent, every country, every demographic group. No predictive factor could be identified for who would be affected and who wouldn't. Dr. Patel slid into the chair across from me, placing 2 cups of coffee on the table. His hands trembled slightly. Neither of us had slept in over 30 hours. "They're calling it the halving," he said, nodding towards the television, "or the 3-minute death, or the global revival, depending on which network you watch." I took the coffee gratefully but didn't drink. "Have you told anyone what you experienced while you were gone?" He hesitated, glancing around the half-empty cafeteria. "Only you. I'm not sure anyone else would understand, or believe me." "The void? The presence? The knowledge?" His eyes widened. "You too then. I wasn't sure if it was just me. Some kind of hallucination or near-death experience." "Not just you," I confirmed, "and I suspect not just us." The first few days were pandemonium. Global markets crashed, then froze. Governments declared states of emergency. Religious leaders proclaimed everything from divine judgment to alien intervention. Scientists scrambled for explanations. Solar flares, electromagnetic anomalies, mass hallucination. But those of us who had died knew different. We had been somewhere else. We had been told something important. We had been given a purpose. I was discharged from observation after 36 hours at the hospital. They needed the beds for more critical cases. People whose return from death had been complicated by physical injuries sustained when they collapsed, or whose pre-existing conditions made the trauma of temporary death more dangerous. My apartment felt strange when I finally returned. Foreign somehow, as if I'd been gone for years rather than days. The familiar furnishings, the photographs on the walls, the books on my shelves, all seemed like artifacts from someone else's life, someone I used to be. I showered, changed clothes, then sat on the edge of my bed, staring at nothing. My mind raced with images and sensations from the void. The immensity of what I'd experienced, what half the world had experienced, was impossible to process all at once. The dream started that first night after returning. Vivid, insistent visions that felt more like memories being uncovered than dreams being created. I saw technological schematics I didn't understand, agricultural techniques I had no training in, social structures unlike anything in human history, each fragment dissolving when I tried to focus on it only to be replaced by another. I woke at 3:17 a.m., drenched in sweat, heart racing. Without thinking, I grabbed a sketchbook from my nightstand and began drawing. My hand moved with certainty, creating diagrams of brain-computer interfaces far more advanced than anything currently in development. Notes in my handwriting filled the margins, references to neural networking principles that seemed both familiar and utterly foreign. When dawn broke, I had filled 27 pages. Looking at them in the cold light of morning, I understood perhaps a tenth of what I'd drawn. The rest was beyond my expertise, beyond current human expertise entirely. But I knew it was important. I knew it was real. I called in sick to work. Then I started researching, cross-referencing my sketches with current scientific literature. Some concepts connected to cutting-edge research. Others seemed to leap decades ahead, building on foundations not yet established. The implications were staggering. My phone buzzed constantly. Friends, family, colleagues, all checking in, sharing their experiences, asking questions I couldn't answer. News notifications piled up, each headline more sensational than the last. Global death event defies scientific explanation. Religious leaders declare divine intervention. Governments establish task forces to investigate 3-minute phenomenon. Conspiracy theories flourish as authorities remain baffled. I ignored most of them, focusing instead on the knowledge trying to surface from my unconscious. By evening, my living room walls were covered with papers, sketches, notes, diagrams, connected by string and pushpins like some cliché detective's crime board. A text from Patel broke my concentration. "Are you watching this? Turn on channel 8. I found the remote and switched on the TV. A news anchor was interviewing a young woman, early 20s, glasses, nervous but determined expression. "Just new things I couldn't possibly know," she was saying. "I work at a coffee shop. I dropped out of community college. But now I understand atmospheric chemistry at a level that experts are confirming is valid. I can see solutions for carbon sequestration that no one's tried before." The anchor looked skeptical. "And you're saying this knowledge just appeared in your mind during the 3 minutes you were clinically dead?" "I know how it sounds," the woman acknowledged, "but I'm not the only one. There are thousands of us sharing our experiences online. Different areas of knowledge, different solutions, but all connected somehow." "Connected to what exactly?" The woman hesitated, then squared her shoulders. "To saving our future." The segment cut back to the studio, where a panel of experts immediately began debating the woman's claims. Terms like mass hysteria, confabulation, and post-traumatic delusion were thrown around liberally. I turned off the TV, my mind racing. She was right, she wasn't alone, and if my experience was representative, millions of others were having similar realizations, discovering implanted knowledge unfolding within their minds. I began searching online forums, social media groups, anywhere people might be sharing their experiences. Within hours, I found dozens of communities forming around the phenomenon. People from all walks of life, all backgrounds, all describing the same basic experience: temporary death, the void, contact with a vast intelligence, and the return with fragmented knowledge they couldn't explain. A physics teacher in Portugal suddenly understood principles of gravity manipulation that contradicted accepted models. A homeless man in Chicago began drawing detailed plans for urban agriculture systems that could produce food for thousands in minimal space. A retired accountant in South Korea described new economic frameworks that balanced resource use with regeneration. Each person held pieces, fragments of a larger whole. Individually, the knowledge was incomplete, often confusing, but patterns were emerging as people connected and shared. I created a profile under a pseudonym and began sharing some of my own fragments, carefully without revealing my identity or location. Within hours, others with complementary knowledge had found my posts. A neuroengineer from Montreal whose implanted knowledge aligned perfectly with sections of my sketches. A computer scientist from Nairobi whose work on quantum processing could implement the interfaces I'd drawn. The conversations accelerated, deepened. We were puzzling out something massive, something world-changing, an integrated system of technologies, methodologies, and social structures designed to redirect human civilization away from collapse. A week after the event, I received an encrypted message from someone calling themselves Nexus. They had created a secure platform for the returned to share their implanted knowledge. The message contained coordinates to a meeting location and a time. I debated going. The world was still in upheaval. Military presence had increased in most major cities. Some governments had begun requiring the return to register with authorities. There were reports of detainments, examinations, but the pull was undeniable. The implanted knowledge urged connection. The night before the meeting, I packed a small bag. Clothes, toiletries, my notebooks. Something told me I might not be returning to my apartment soon. I wrote letters to my parents and my sister, explaining as best I could what had happened and what I needed to do. I scheduled them to send automatically if I didn't reset the timer every 3 days. Then I erased my digital footprints, deleted search history, forum accounts, messaging apps. The precautions felt dramatic, perhaps paranoid, but necessary. Something fundamental had changed in the world's power dynamics, and those who controlled information and resources before would fight to maintain that control. I left before dawn, driving my modest sedan, rather than taking more traceable public transportation. The meeting location was an abandoned community centre 30 miles outside the city, in a small town hollowed out by economic collapse years earlier. When I arrived, 24 others were already there. I didn't recognise anyone, yet I felt an immediate connection, a sense of familiarity that transcended physical appearance or background. As we gathered in what once had been a gymnasium, something extraordinary happened. The moment we were all assembled, our thoughts began to overlap. Not mind-reading exactly, more like resonance, ideas flowing between us without words. The fragments of knowledge we each carried, briefly aligning into clearer pictures. A woman named Amara, previously an architectural engineer, stood at the centre of our circle, tall and composed, with close-cropped silver hair and eyes that reflected both intelligence and compassion. "We all feel it, don't we?" she said, her voice steady. "We've been changed, given something, and now we need to use it." No one disagreed. We all felt the imperative. Jason, formerly a climate scientist, spoke next. Younger than most of us, with the intense energy of someone who had spent years shouting warnings no one heeded. "I've been seeing designs for atmospheric moisture harvesters that could produce clean water in desert conditions. Technology that shouldn't exist yet, but I only have pieces." Others nodded, contributing their own fragments. Elena, a former graphic designer, had knowledge of communication systems that could operate without conventional infrastructure. Michael, previously a construction worker, understood new building materials that could withstand extreme weather while sequestering carbon. Kwame, once a teacher, described educational methods that could rapidly disseminate essential skills during societal transition. The picture that emerged was both hopeful and overwhelming. We had been given solutions to humanity's most pressing problems: climate change, food security, sustainable energy, resource management. But the knowledge was distributed, incomplete without collaboration. And there was something else, a timeline, a sense of urgency. We had been shown a future where humanity nearly destroyed itself, but the intelligence that contacted us didn't come from some other world or dimension. It came from Earth's future. A small fraction of humanity had survived the collapse. They had evolved, developed technologies beyond our comprehension, including the ability to reach backward through time and consciousness. Not to physically change the past, that wasn't possible, but to influence it, to guide it toward a different outcome. The 3-minute death was their intervention point, their way of implanting enough of their knowledge into enough of the population to alter our trajectory. "They're us," I explained to the group, sharing my realization from the void. "Descendants of the few who survived the cascade of disasters we're heading toward. They found a way to reach back, to give us a chance they never had." "Why not just tell everyone directly?" asked Thomas, an economist. "Why this fragmented approach?" "For the same reason we develop antibiotics carefully," said Layla, a microbiologist. "Too much too quickly creates resistance. Sudden revolutionary change triggers immune responses in systems, including social systems." "And the knowledge," added Amara, "it's not just data, it's understanding that requires preparation, context. It has to unfold gradually, be integrated with what we already know." As the meeting continued late into the night, we realized another aspect of our connection. When in close proximity, our implanted knowledge became stronger, more accessible, as if proximity strengthened the signal. We tested the limits of this phenomenon. Beyond about 30 feet, the effect diminished, but within that radius, the clarity was remarkable. Ideas that had been fragments in isolation became whole concepts when shared. Problems that seemed insurmountable individually became solvable collectively. We made plans before departing. Each of us would seek out others nearby who complemented our knowledge fragments. Small groups would form first, then connect with other groups, a network of networks growing organically. But we weren't naive. We understood the resistance we would face. The existing power structures won't surrender easily, warned Thomas. Corporations, governments, military, they'll see us as threats to stability. Some will, Amara agreed. Others will recognize the opportunity. We need to find allies within existing systems. And those of us who don't fit any useful knowledge category? Asked a young man who'd introduced himself as Darius. I'm not getting technical schematics or scientific breakthroughs, just feelings, intuitions about people. Amara smiled. That may be the most valuable skill of all. Building bridges, identifying who can be trusted, who's ready to listen. We need that more than any technology. We dispersed before sunrise, taking different routes back to our lives, but we were connected now, not just digitally through encrypted channels that Nexus had established, but through our shared purpose and the complementary knowledge we carried. I returned to work the following Monday, attempting to maintain the appearance of normalcy. The hospital had established new protocols for monitoring patients who had experienced the 3-minute death. Additional brain scans, blood work, psychological evaluations. As a neurologist, I was expected to help interpret the results. The data was fascinating. Subtle but consistent changes in brain activity among the returned. Increased connectivity between regions, typically less integrated. Enhanced neuroplasticity. Nothing dramatic enough to raise immediate alarms, but significant to those who knew what to look for. I documented everything while being careful not to draw attention to my own research. The connections I was making between these changes and the implanted knowledge manifesting in dreams and spontaneous insights. Within weeks, the first government inquiries began. I received a formal request to appear before a joint task force of Homeland Security and scientific agencies. The letter was politely worded, but clearly a command, not an invitation. I was brought to a nondescript office building downtown. The questioning took place in a conference room devoid of personality. Beige walls, generic furniture, cameras visible in ceiling corners. 3 interviewers. A woman in a navy suit who identified herself as Dr. Wallace from the National Science Foundation. A middle-aged man introduced only as Mr. Peterson, with military bearing but civilian clothes, and a younger man who said nothing but took notes on a tablet. Thank you for coming, Dr. Reeves, Dr. Wallace began. We're interviewing a cross-section of individuals who experienced the April 17th event. Your medical background makes your perspective particularly valuable. The questions started general. What did I remember about the moment of collapse? Did I experience any sensation during the 3 minutes? What physical or psychological symptoms followed my revival? I told partial truths. Yes, I had experienced something like consciousness without body. No, I couldn't explain it scientifically. Yes, I had unusual dreams since then. No, I didn't believe it was a threat to national security. And have you noticed any changes in your thinking? New ideas or knowledge that seems unusual for you? Mr. Peterson asked, leaning forward slightly. I hesitated, calculating my response. I've had some interesting insights related to my research. Nothing extraordinary. Your research in consciousness studies, he nodded. Convenient area of expertise for understanding this event? I wouldn't say understanding, more like documenting. I kept my expression neutral. We're all grasping at explanations. Indeed, He slid a tablet across the table. "Would you mind explaining these?" On the screen were images of my sketches, the ones I'd created during my post-return fugue state. The diagrams of advanced neural interfaces, the notes about consciousness transfer technology, my private work from my home. They'd been watching, searching my apartment. My stomach tightened, but I maintained my composure. "Speculative work," I said calmly. "Attempts to process what happened through the lens of my professional expertise." "Highly advanced speculative work," Dr. Wallace commented. "Several of our experts couldn't make sense of some of these concepts." As I said, I was processing a traumatic experience. Not all of it is coherent. The questioning continued for hours. They pressed on connections to other returned online forums I'd visited, my meeting with the group at the community centre. They knew far more than I'd anticipated, but they didn't seem to fully grasp the significance of what we'd been given, or they were hiding their understanding. I was released after 3 days of questioning, but placed under surveillance. Many others faced similar scrutiny. Some disappeared into government facilities, others went into hiding. Meanwhile, corporate interests began their own investigations. Pharmaceutical companies wanted to study the neurological changes in the returned. Tech firms sought to exploit any new knowledge we might possess. Energy companies grew concerned as rumors spread about revolutionary power generation methods. The opposition wasn't just external. Among the returned, differences emerged. Some wanted to immediately release all the implanted knowledge publicly. Others advocated caution, fearing misuse of advanced technologies. A small faction believed the experience had granted them superiority over those who hadn't died and returned. The network we were building faced fractures before it fully formed. 2 months after the event, I received an encrypted message from Amara. "Progress compromised. Need secure location. Bring in key members. Coordinates follow." The location was a former research facility in the mountains, purchased through a series of shell companies by allies with resources. When I arrived, after taking elaborate precautions to ensure I wasn't followed, I found a compound designed for long-term occupation. Solar panels, greenhouse agriculture, advanced security systems. Amara greeted me at the entrance, her expression grave. "We've lost contact with 6 regional groups in the past week. Government containment strategies are escalating." "Containment?" I asked, following her through the facility. "Their preferred term, identification, isolation, and study of returned exhibiting concerning behavioral patterns, meaning those of us actively developing the implanted knowledge." She led me to a conference room where about 30 people had gathered, many from our original meeting, others I didn't recognize. Displays showed data streams, news feeds, communication networks. "We're establishing similar facilities globally," Amara explained. "Places where complementary knowledge can be developed without interference. The network is adapting, becoming more resilient." 3 months after the event, I had my breakthrough. Using the facility's advanced neuroimaging equipment, I mapped my own brain activity while accessing the implanted knowledge. The patterns were unique, unlike anything in scientific literature. By developing a specific meditative technique, I could access deeper layers of the implantation. What I found confirmed what we had begun to piece together. The non-human intelligence was human, just not human as we currently exist. They were our evolutionary descendants, altered by both time and necessity after Earth's near destruction. They couldn't physically travel back in time, but they had developed the ability to project consciousness across temporal barriers. The 3-minute global death had been their window, the only point in history where they could reach back with enough precision and power to affect half the world's population simultaneously. Their message became clearer. "We are you, you are our past, we are your potential future, but only one of many possible futures. The most probable outcome was extinction. They had intervened to improve our odds." With this understanding, my resolve strengthened. I shared my findings with our growing network. By then, 6 months after the event, we had connected with nearly 30 million returned worldwide. Small innovations had already begun emerging. More efficient solar cells, drought-resistant crop variants, water purification systems that required minimal energy. But these were just the beginning. The full implementation would require coordination on a global scale. We developed a 3-phase plan. First, release innovations that could be easily adopted within existing systems, improvements rather than replacements. Second, introduce more transformative technologies as public acceptance grew. Third, guide the transition to entirely new systems of energy, agriculture, resource management, and social organization. Each phase had its challenges. The first innovations needed to be non-threatening enough to avoid suppression, but significant enough to generate interest and prove our credibility. The second phase required navigating increasingly complex political and economic resistance. The third would fundamentally reshape human civilization, a prospect as terrifying as it was necessary. Our network continued to grow, adapting to opposition by becoming more distributed, more resilient. Cells operated semi-autonomously, sharing breakthroughs through encrypted channels. We identified allies within governments, corporations, and influential NGOs, people who recognized the existential threats facing humanity and were open to unconventional solutions. The opposition intensified as our influence grew. Government agencies classified some of our network as potential threats to economic stability. Energy conglomerates launched disinformation campaigns about the safety of our proposed technologies. Religious organizations denounced the returned as corrupted by otherworldly forces. Things came to a head 1 year after the event. Our network had established a research compound in Colorado, where some of our most promising innovations were being developed. Teams of returned engineers, scientists, and visionaries had created a self-sustaining community that showcased what was possible. I was visiting the compound when it happened. Pre-dawn, the perimeter alarm sounded. Military and federal agents surrounded the facility, citing national security concerns and unauthorized technological development. We had prepared for this possibility. Emergency protocols activated, data backups transmitted to secure locations, essential personnel moved to hidden exit routes. But I made a different decision. As they breached the main gates, I realized we couldn't continue in the shadows. The incremental approach was too slow. The planetary systems were degrading faster than our models had predicted. We needed to force a breakthrough in public consciousness. I reached the communications hub as agents entered the main building. With trembling hands, I initiated the broadcast sequence. Across the world, screens flickered. The message began transmitting. Not just information, but the pure consciousness to consciousness communication the future intelligence had used with us. Anyone watching or listening would receive fragments of the implanted knowledge, not as completely as the returned had, but enough to understand, enough to recognize truth. I was still connected to the system when the agents reached me. I don't remember much after that. Darkness again, though not like the void, just unconsciousness. I woke in a government facility, military hospital based on the personnel. I was treated well, not as a prisoner, but as a valuable asset. The officer in charge, Colonel Rivera, sat beside my bed when I regained consciousness. "That was quite a show, Dr. Reeves," he said without preamble. "Half my team experienced your broadcast directly. The other half has been getting first-hand accounts." He studied me carefully. "They believe you now. We believe you. The question is, what happens next?" What happened next unfolded gradually, then suddenly, like many historical shifts. The broadcast had reached approximately 60% of the global population. Not everyone was immediately convinced, but doubt had been planted. Questions were being asked. Demands for transparency grew. Governments found themselves unable to contain what was spreading, not disease or falsehood, but possibility. The vision of a sustainable, abundant future versus the reality of our current destructive trajectory became impossible to ignore. 2 years after the event, the first International Transition Council formed. Representatives from government, industry, science, and the Return Network came together to plan implementation of the most critical innovations, not without resistance, not without compromise, but with unmistakable momentum. 3 years after, the first large-scale atmospheric carbon capture facilities went online, using technology pieced together from hundreds of returned engineers. New agricultural methods increased yields while regenerating soil health. Energy systems began transitioning to technologies that seemed impossible before, harnessing energy at efficiencies that rewrote physics textbooks. The social transformations were equally profound. Economic models shifted from endless growth to regenerative balance. Education systems incorporated the rapid learning methodologies glimpsed by returned teachers. Healthcare advances extended not just lifespan but health span, while becoming universally accessible. Now, 5 years later, I stand at the window of my apartment, watching the city below. Solar collection surfaces integrate seamlessly into buildings and streets. Urban farms spiral up skyscrapers. Transportation moves silently on systems powered by energy we're still developing terminology to describe. It wasn't painless, this transition. Some industries collapsed. Political systems transformed. Some peacefully, others not. There were those who fought change until the end. There are still pockets of resistance. But we're on a different path now. The nightmares I had before the event, the ones that continued after, showing environmental collapse and human suffering, have changed. Now I dream of cities integrated with forests, communities thriving in regions once deemed uninhabitable, children who take abundance for granted again, but with awareness of how precarious it once was. Sometimes in quiet moments between sleep and waking, I feel that connection again, the one I experienced in the void. The vast intelligence reaches across time, acknowledging our progress. I sense gratitude, encouragement, and something else, a hint that our development has only begun. Last night I dreamed of stars, not just observing them, but reaching them. Technologies beyond anything we've implemented so far. The next phase, perhaps, once we've secured our planetary home. And in that dream, I understood something else that had been implicit in the implanted knowledge, but never directly stated. The future beings who reached back to us weren't just trying to prevent extinction. They were ensuring their own existence. The evolved humanity that survived the collapse, the intelligence that found a way to reach across time. They were magnificent in their resilience, their wisdom, their capabilities. But they were few, and they knew humanity could be so much more if given another chance. Half the Earth died for 3 minutes. We came back with purpose. And now, having altered our trajectory, we've begun to understand the greater implication. The intelligence that reached back through time to save us wasn't just our descendant. It's who we are becoming.